her mad.
It
And the
is Happy Halloween, everybody! You guys, it's obviously Monday because Author Talk is on. So you guys know me, Amy, here with Fern, Russell, and our lovely guest today is George. And you guys, we hope that you guys are going to have a fantastic Halloween. My girls are at school currently, and they are the Powerpuff Girls in their little tutus and their outfits. I will post photos later because I have to also dress up. It's a whole shebang, okay? We have the white tights and everything for my kids, so they're super excited. So they are there at the moment. But we wish all of you guys a happy and safe Halloween. So what did you guys do this weekend? I built or made Halloween costumes, obviously. And we cleaned out my garage and getting ready. Josh is going to go on a camping trip this coming weekend or next weekend. And so we're just getting everything ready. And Russell, he has talked me into doing a practice backpacking trip on like the week of Thanksgiving, a 2-day.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I know. So we'll see how this goes. But how was everybody else's weekend?
That was great. Thank you.
Well, I am stranded out in a car because I'm locked out of where I'm supposed to do this with George. And every time I try to arrange to do something with George, who, by the way, for our listeners, George in Atlanta is kind of a big deal. He runs stuff. He has events all the time. And he's an incredibly nice guy. But every time I try to set something up with George, I get locked out of places. I'm locked out of where I'm supposed to do the show. If I disappear and reappear, it's because the guy shows up. That's my weekend. And show the picture of my granddaughters. It's the first Halloween picture. Strawberries and shortcake.
I love it. That's adorable. That is the cutest thing ever. Oh, I love them.
That is adorable.
That's such a cute one. I love it. Fern, what about you? Good morning, Greg.
I do not dress up my daughter because she is a husky and she doesn't really care for doggy outfits, so I don't even bother with that. But no, this past weekend actually was, I'm trying very desperately to finish book 2 revision draft to send to my editor today, because today technically is the due date.
Hey.
And that's probably not going to happen because yes,
we have to hit our due
time with us.
well, that, and plus I got to go teach a class that I teach every afternoon, and just it's probably not going to happen, but it needs to happen by the end of this week so that I can move forward to NaNoWriMo, because that starts technically at midnight today. So yes, I'm going to start NaNoWriMo late, but I need to finish this book because I need him to have it and review it, and
What's
I just
the name
need to
of
get
the
it off my
book?
plate.
What's the name?
Gordive Offensive. This is the Gordive Offensive. This is book 2 from the United Vidin series. That was the one that's out right now. Is book 1, United Vidin. Takes place on planet Jorn, right? Science fantasy, epic soap opera, space opera. Yeah.
Love
the
it.
whole thing. And I'm having to integrate Air Force because I kind of forgot that these people have spaceships, and so they clearly would have airplanes, and in the middle of a war they might want to use them,
right? So, makes sense to me. It makes sense to me. It does.
I know, but what was funny? I had this conversation with a friend of mine last night, and she's like, "Why don't you just say, Fern, that they stopped using them because they thought it was outdated since they had just the spaceships, and now they're like wishing that they had them, and then that saves you the trouble of having to build it in." And I was like, "Ooh." I don't think that will fly with my editor, but I might try it just to see what happens. Yeah, you like it.
Russell, you made it.
I did. The George jinx is maybe overcome.
Yay! I love it. So, George, what did you do this weekend?
Well, I'm just on the cusp of our 27th Atlanta Writers Conference, and I've run all 27 of them, and so this is crazy time for me. I'm following up with people on their schedules. I'm having to change schedules as people's plans change, doing all of that. So
Right.
this is always a fun, interesting time of year for me. I do 2 of these a year, in the fall and in the spring. So, and I'm already planning for the May 2023 Atlanta Writers Conference.
And the one in the spring was a huge success.
Yeah,
I went to it. It was a huge success.
Thank you. And we're actually doing 2 in the spring now. We do the traditional publishing conference, where I bring in literary agents and acquisitions editors, and a self-publishing conference to help people who are indie authors get farther in their goals and aspirations for their books.
Yeah, we did that too here with the Houston Writers Guild. We started hosting Indie Palooza because it's such an important part too.
It is.
Really
it is
honor those authors.
You know, they really are entrepreneurs who have to do everything. You know, it's like starting a small business. And I think a lot of writers don't realize that when they're going in. They just think, well, I'm gonna, publish my own books and keep all the money, and that's all there is to it. Nope.
No.
There's a whole lot more.
It gets very complicated very fast. But I think having as an organization, and I'm so happy to hear that you guys are doing it as well, having a conference just for them that's geared specifically towards, okay, how are you a small business? Yeah. And not just in terms of small businesses in general, but specifically for our industry, what does that look like? Yep. Because there's significant differences in terms of, because I've been to many, small business expos that the Small Business Administration hosts and stuff, and they're useful. There's useful stuff, but it's nice to have something more targeted for our authors.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%.
So George, how would people that we have, we're like, to our surprise, top 10 independent book podcast in America. We've gotten that notice. We were really shocked. Most people listen to us. They don't watch this on Mondays. Mm-hmm. And so for those people listen, no, they're not.
Well,
but
we do have
if you want to post, if you'll send us a picture, we'll post it on our Facebook page, Author Talk Facebook page, that listeners can join and then see your beautiful hat. Yes. But how would they, if they want to come to one of your conferences, how do they reach out to on one of those conferences? And Fern, will you tell us, the listeners, how they would reach out for one of the Houston conferences if they'd rather go there?
Oh, sure.
Fern, you start.
I'll let. Well, the Houston Writers Guild.org is our website, and you can find all of our information on our programming there, primarily on our Writers Room page. We have all our workshops and everything on there, and you can also find us on Eventbrite. We usually do all of our ticket sales through Eventbrite, so you can find just the Houston Writers Guild, no apostrophe, even though technically that is a grammatical error. That is our name. That is our official name. I did not make it up. I inherited it. And I've had some very interesting conversations with other organizations, about like, well, shouldn't there be an apostrophe? Yes, grammatically that it would be correct. But this is our name. Okay. So just Writers Guild, HoustonWritersGuild.org. You can get all our programming on there. George, how about y'all?
Let's see, for the Atlanta Writers Conference, that's the traditional one with the agents and the editors. If you're looking to get published traditionally, that is simply AtlantaWritersConference.com, AtlantaWritersConference.com. And then for the self-publishing conference, it's AtlantaSelfPublishingConference.com. Easy peasy. And if you want more information about the Atlanta Writers Club, it's at AtlantaWritersClub.org. And here's what I tell people about the whole apostrophe thing. It's a club of writers, that it's not the writers don't own the club. It's a club of writers. So Atlanta Writers Club, no apostrophe, is absolutely correct.
I'm totally stealing that from now on.
Fern, see why I like George so much now?
Yeah, I'm stealing that.
He's so pleasant.
Yeah,
that's perfect. This is an organization Right. This is a guild of writers, right? Not
Yes.
the not owned by the writer. I love
Yeah.
that. What a great way to deal with those, grammar Nazis.
Yeah.
That's how I
Well,
like to call them,
my
those people.
Halloween gift to you.
It's perfect. It's perfect. I love it.
All right. I've already paid my own
So,
way. Okay.
so what did you do this weekend, George?
Oh gosh, it's nothing but conference stuff for me.
Just
So our
conference work?
next conference is November 4th and 5th, and so this is
Oh, you're
this
on
is
the
real
edge of
stress
it.
time
Yes.
for me. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
got this big smile on my face, but inside it's like, oh my God, there's so much left to do.
I get how you feel. I think we all understand how you feel. Burn with the Houston Writers Guild, and then I have a 12-day summit, and so I'm right there with you with the fact of, you think you have the schedule set, and then it's not set, and you have to move things, and you find a way to make it work, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
stress of it all, which is, I don't know, for me, I thrive in that environment. I don't know why, but I do. So,
Yeah,
but
I always miss it when it's over. Don't you?
right. I get it. I mean, I relax for a little bit afterwards and I'm like, all right, we're going to do this again,
Yeah.
but halfway through it, I'm like, I'm never doing this again, ever. No,
Which I remember you saying last year that you would never do it again. And I was shocked when you like totally changed that.
Hey,
Because
so
she
many
was
people
like,
had
she
fun.
had it.
So many
No,
people had fun. So
I think we all feel that way when we're putting together an event like this. We all feel that way. Like, oh, I'll never do this again. Oh my God, what did I do to myself, right? But at the end of the day, it's such a blessing, not just for the other people who come, but for us ourselves too. I mean, the connections we make and just it feels good. I don't know about you, George, but I enjoy knowing that you're bringing value to your community and that we're building something together, because our profession is one where you can actually, yes, really coordinate together and nobody's going to lose sales from it. On the contrary, everybody's going to benefit, so I really enjoyed that feeling of our community.
Absolutely. I think we're the rising tide that floats all boats. Yep. Yeah. And this is a labor of love,
Yes.
Nobody's getting rich off of this. We're
Truth.
doing this because we love other writers. I don't know about y'all, but all my best friends are writers. Everybody, who's really important in my life, with very minor exceptions, a few other hobbies I do on the side. Everybody is, involved, with my writing life. My wife is a writer I met because I started critique groups, 2 decades ago. And, so
Yeah.
that's.
I doubt you're a pretty rough critique in the critique group on your own wife, because that would just be like ridiculously stupid.
Oh, I was brutal, when she joined the group. I had no idea.
Did you ever throw papers at her? Because
No.
that's the one thing, Russell.
Because Fern throws papers at me.
I don't know if it was at you. It was just near you.
No, she threw stuff at me. She's a thrower.
No.
Were you ever a thrower in your critique group, George?
No, you're always supposed to critique the work and not the person. So if I threw a piece of paper, I would be
Fern.
at the work.
No, I critiqued the work. I just threw the papers down because the work was not getting, up to par where I thought it needed to be.
Someone wasn't listening. They weren't listening.
So let's change the subject. I want to talk about George's cover picture, not Fern throwing paper at me and abusing her good friend.
I love you, Russell. George, talk to us about your book that's coming out. This is a sequel, right? This is a sequel to another book.
And these cover pictures that you have.
Yeah,
I want to talk about those too.
Yeah, I don't know if you have cover images loaded up, but I can share them later if you don't. But the book that just came out is called Return to Hardscrabble Road, and it's a sequel to a book that came out a decade ago called Hardscrabble Road. And so clever me, I fit the title in the sequel too, because I'm no fool. There you go. So there's the sequel cover. And on the cover of the original, the first book in the series, Hardscrabble Road, it has these three boys, but as little boys. So the character that you see to your far right, the smallest one, he is the point of view character. Everything's told through his eyes. His name is Roger Bud McLeod. And on the original cover, he's 6 years old, and here he's mid-teens. And then the middle brother is in the middle, and the oldest brother is at the opposite end. And you see them, again, as little kids on the cover of Hardscrabble Road. And this continues their adventures exactly where the first book leaves off. So it could really just be another chapter in Hardscrabble Road. And this could be a saga rather than a 2-book series. It could be just one long-ass single book. So the backstory of all this is why those kids on the cover, why this story is in 1991, when my first wife and I went to visit her folks in Alabama, I was introduced to her dad, who was the best storyteller God's ever put on this earth. It was a very natural thing for him to do. Nothing felt self-conscious or staged. It's what he did. It's how he related to life. Was whatever was going on, in current events or with the family and all, he could relate to something that happened to him or his family growing up in Southwest Georgia in the 1930s and 1940s. And it's just what he would do quite naturally, at the end of, it was a proper Southern household, so there was no lunch. It was dinner at noon and then supper in the evening. The word lunch was never spoken. And so, he'd push back from the dinner or supper table, which was the same table, but called different things at different times of day, and just start spinning stories from his growing up days. And they were fascinating to me because I grew up really privileged, middle-class, suburban kid in the 1960s and 70s and into the 80s. And, if I wanted something to eat, there was always food to eat. If, I wanted, an Atari 2600 for Christmas, there was an Atari 2600 for Christmas. My dad would spend all day trying to hunt down Space Invaders for me. So I had it all, and I'm listening to these stories of having nothing, and worse than having nothing was having a sociopath for a father and a mother who had no interest in raising her children. So he and his older brothers and older sister pretty much had to raise each other during the Great Depression and the war years, and it was tough going, as you can imagine. So Hardscrabble Road is a physical road outside of Colquitt in these books, but it's also a really good metaphor for their journey through childhood. It was a very hard scrabble growing up. And I was just fascinated by these stories because they could not have been more different from the life I had led when, I was his age in those stories. 6 decades later or whatever, 4, 5, 6 decades later, they couldn't have been
fascinating that, I find it fascinating that this book was born from conversations.
Yeah, it was. And oral history. So I became very intentional after the very first story I heard him tell of writing down in exactly. I rely a lot on audio for learning. So, I could write down pretty much exactly as he told it, the same words he used. I would write down his stories, and collected these for an entire decade. I had binders full of them, and decided after, a decade that, this could be a novel and should be a novel. And so I approached him. I said, look, I don't want to write your biography.
Right.
I want to write a story that is inspired by the stories that I've collected over the last decade from you and your two older brothers when they would come to visit. I'd do the same thing with them. I'd, go write down their stories too. I would really like to write a novel, but I need all of your sense memories. So you've told a lot of stories.
Mhm.
What we haven't talked about was the way things smelled and felt and tasted and all that stuff. The
Ooh.
things that really
Ooh.
make a novel jump off the page, in a reader's
Mhm.
mind. And so I would like to interview you intentionally, about those things. Put me on a school bus in 1938 outside of Colquitt, Georgia. What was that like? And he said, who would care? I can hear him now. It was just nothing but disdain. He said, who would
Right.
care? I was one of a million poor Southern kids who escaped into the military, and that was it. My story was just like a million others. Nobody would care. Don't waste your time. And he totally resisted this. So this is, if you're doing the hero's journey, this is refusing the call, right? So he
Right.
refused the call. And so, I really wanted to do this project, but I needed his help because I didn't live back then. I didn't live in those circumstances. I really needed primary source information that I couldn't get anywhere. You won't find that kind of stuff in a book. So my project's dead without him. So I thought back to one of the stories he told. And this is, the manipulative part of being a writer. And we all know this, right? We're all among friends here. We manipulate the hell out of people when we're trying to get something out of them for a writing project. So this was my manipulation. So I remember back to a story. His daddy, besides being an absolute psychopath, was a bootlegging middleman in Southwest Georgia. So he would drive to Florida with one of his children as a human shield in the car because he knew that the revenuers wouldn't shoot at his pickup truck if there was a child in the front seat. So he always had one of his three boys riding with him when he went down to Florida to pick up
Wow.
the moonshine as a human shield. And there were a couple of black men who sharecropped on the same property.
Parent of the Year award there. Parent of the Year
Oh
award.
yeah. He was a prince among men. And so he'd always have one of the black men who sharecropped on the same property come with him too, to, as muscle to help him haul all the 50-pound casks of bootleg whiskey. So we drive down to Florida with one of these kids, and there was a sheriff in the county where these bootleggers made their shine. And Papa paid this guy money, hand over fist. But also, as an additional bribe, he named my former father-in-law after that sheriff as an additional bribe. So, of course, as you can imagine, my former father-in-law did not appreciate being named after, this corrupt sheriff, as a bribe. So he talked about that in one of the stories and how he never liked his name. And I said, well, you get to name this character in the novel. What's going to be? And he said,
nice. I love it.
I've always liked the name Roger. I said, that's it. He said, he's going to be named Roger in the novel. And it was like flipping a switch. All of a sudden, he was really interested. He said, really? I said, yep. You've named the character. He's going to be named Roger. Let's start talking. He said, well, okay. And that's all it took. And by the end of the interviewing, and now it was, months and years of additional interviewing whenever we went to Alabama to visit. By the end of that, he had written his own memoirs where he put down all of his stories as a keepsake for his three kids. So it started out with him refusing the call, and saying who would care. And by the end, he was actually writing down his stories, and stories that none of them had ever heard before, and I had never heard before, were, all contained in this memoir that he had left them. So I thought that
And
was
what a powerful thing, because You see this a lot, and you kind of begin to feel it, that we're losing history, because
Hmm.
when this generation begins to move on, to transcend, you're all of that knowledge, all of the things that they lived through are gone. And
Yep.
and so what a powerful thing that you were able to motivate him to actually
Yeah.
put it down on paper for him,
Yeah.
for his family. How cool is that?
To me, that's the best thing that happened from this project. Even more than getting a book out of it, now a second book out of it. The fact that I inspired him so much to put down those stories so that his kids will have them forever. And then his grandkids will have them, and it'll get those binders get passed down, through the
Oh.
generations.
So
Uh,
so you wrote the first book a while ago,
oh, a long time
right?
ago, 20 years ago.
And
Yeah.
then you went on to other projects.
Yeah.
What made you return? Like the title says, what made you return to it?
Well, so the first book, I had a literary agent at the time. I had written a novel to learn how to write a novel because I didn't want to learn how to write a novel using his story. So I wrote a novel that went through, God, 24 drafts and all, called The Five Destinies of Carlos Moreno, which is set in Houston and in Galveston, um, about forgotten U.S. history. So if you don't mind a segue. So between 1928 and 1941, the government deported over 2 million people of Mexican heritage, and half of them were American citizens, maybe more than half.
Wow.
And this started with the Hoover administration, and then FDR did it all throughout the 1930s and into the 40s, and only stopped because the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and we were embroiled in World War II. And all of a sudden, it seemed like a good idea to have immigrant labor and
Huh.
people
Yeah.
working the railroad tracks and laying railroad tracks and farms and factories and all that. But these people weren't immigrants who they were deporting. Half of them, anyways, they had been in the country sometimes 6, 8, 10 generations before there was a United
Mm.
States. They'd been here,
Right. The United
and
States came to them.
yes,
They
exactly.
didn't go to it.
But
Right.
if you were brown and you looked poor, they would stop you on the streets, and the local law enforcement could do it, and INS could do it, and say, prove you're a citizen. And you would have to have a birth certificate in your pocket to do that. And you wouldn't, because why would you? And so they would put you on a truck, drive you to the border in Texas and California and the other border states. And they would have this little kangaroo court where they'd find you guilty for being in the country illegally. And they put you on what they called a repatriation train and send you with thousands of others to the south end of Mexico and kick you out in places like Oaxaca. And now you're 3,000 miles from the border. And it's possible that you did not speak any Spanish. You certainly didn't know Mexican culture because you were an American through and through.
You were. Mm-hmm.
And
This
then
sounds awful.
the real irony, the real horribleness is, so families were separated, children walking home from school were snatched up, mothers walking to the market, fathers going to a factory job. They would just disappear and end up in the south end of Mexico. Their family had no idea what happened to them. But the real horribleness, the terrible irony, is that when World War II started, draft notices started going out. And guess who got draft notices?
The people who are no longer in the country.
That's right. The people we had kicked out a decade before then got draft notices because they were American citizens. They were on the books somewhere because they were able to get them draft notices. And the post office used to be so good, they were able to find them in the south end of Mexico, get them their draft notice. And so now they at last had proof that they were citizens because I've been ordered to report to the draft board so I can fight for the country that kicked me out a decade ago.
George, that's ironic.
Yeah.
That's ironic. My father was in the South Pacific War, and he had two buddies that the three of them were inseparable during the many battles until they were separated by other things. Yeah. And one was someone in that situation that was inducted by the draft board in El Paso,
Yeah.
and he was one of my dad's two buddies that they protected each other's back during, the invasion of Saipan and Iwo Jima and Okinawa. So that's ironic.
Hard
I
fighting.
think
But
I think
that's
it's
a part of my
interesting to
family
see.
history.
It's interesting to note that the United States has really not changed.
Not a
We
bit.
still doing the same things, and still having the same like anti-immigrant thing that has been here since the beginning, really.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous.
Yeah. I think
it's
Mark
pretty
Twain said,
ridiculous.
history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
It sure does. It's like
Yeah. So anyway,
is
so that
so
was
crazy.
my first novel. I got an agent with that novel, and that proved to me that, okay, I must have some, a little bit of talent. And then I wrote Hardscrabble Road, because again, I didn't want to learn how to write a book. I wanted to get his.
And I'm just
my
going to
former
jump in here
father-in-law's
and,
story
and
straight.
talk
Yeah.
a little bit about what you just said about, that getting that literary agent sort of made you feel like, yes, okay, I must have it. And so many authors feel like unless someone sort of does like a
Anoints you.
blessing, right?
Yes.
Anoints you.
That's right.
That you're not, and that's one thing that we need to sort of do away with in our community, because you are a writer, you're an author if you have a story to tell.
Yeah.
Nobody needs to anoint you. Nobody has to say. And so many times, and I've seen people, because I own Inklings Publishing, so we get submissions and we have to reject them because we can't take everybody. And so many times they feel like, oh, it must not have been good. But it's not about whether or not it was good. It's just about whether or not the budget is there, or, does it fit the direction the company is going right now?
Did
and
you just
we need
publish
to,
something like it?
yeah. So we really need to do away with this idea that, acceptance by, some other gatekeeper or some, publishing house or whatever is the thing to seek. You are a writer if your writing is in your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it speaks to the underconfidence of lots of writers that we're looking for that outside approval. So, and I certainly was back then, because, I didn't know anybody in the writing community. I didn't know another writer, and that's why I joined the
Right.
Atlanta Writers Club, because I didn't know any other writers, and I needed to get part of a community. So, so I wrote Hardscrabble, sent that to the agent, wrote a third book, sent that to the agent. She didn't sell any of them. I finally fired her after I got my own paying gig writing a children's adventure book for a little nonprofit here in Georgia. And then I just focused on helping other writers. And my former father-in-law never asked about our project. To him, the fact that the book was never published just reinforced his original feeling that who would care? Well, nobody would care. Nobody did care. And it wasn't until 2012 that I found a small publisher, and Hardscrabble came out, and it's been, it's not like it sold 10,000 copies, its first month. It's been a very slow ramp up, but it's sold at least 40,000 copies now. And so a decade later, well, it was time for the sequel to come out. And it was a sequel I really struggled with, because by then I was divorced from my first wife, whose father, was the one I was writing
Was the
about.
source.
He was gone. His older brothers and older sister were gone. They're all dead. And there was a part of me that felt like it wasn't my story to continue to write about. But then I realized, well, dummy, I'm writing a novel, I'm not writing their biographies. That would absolutely be true if I were, writing part 2 of their biographies, but I wasn't. I was writing about characters who I invented. I was, some things were inspired by their stories, but there's a whole lot there that, was just stuff I, created wholesale out of my imagination. So I gave myself permission to work on the second novel. And I called it Return to Hardscrabble Road because, well, for marketing purposes, that made a whole lot more sense than something else.
Yeah.
Although a friend of mine who uses the pen name Dusty Roberts gave me a much better title, and I wish I could have used it. It was Scrabble Harder.
Oh, that's a great title. Yeah.
So I'll just use that
No,
one.
but with the books
Book
being
my title.
so separate in years, it makes sense to do the return to Hardscrabble Road. For sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. And people had been asking me, since the first one came out, when will there be a sequel? Because, the way I wrote the ending, it did kind of beg for a sequel. And I just struggled with the idea of sequels because I wanted to write what I wanted to write. None of my books until now are similar in any way. They're all different. They're different genres. I've written amateur sleuth murder mystery. I've written kidnapping thriller with a dude in distress instead of the usual damsel in distress, and the damsel's trying to ride to his rescue. That's called Watch What You Say. The amateur sleuth murder mystery is called Aftermath. If anybody's interested, you can go to GeorgeWeinstein.com if you are interested. But I was writing in different genres each time and just doing what I wanted to do. So this is the first time I had to kind of force myself to write in the same genre, about the same characters, and I had to kind of learn how to write a sequel since I had never written one before.
George, what genre do you what is Hardscrabble? What is this genre?
It's the large focus is historical fiction, and then I always call it Southern historical fiction, since it's very Southern. It's the characters speak in dialect, very Southwest Georgia specific dialect. My wife grew up in Douglasville, and she's reading Return to Hardscrabble Road and saying, I don't know that expression before. We say it differently, in Northwest Georgia than the way they do in Southwest Georgia. So it's very, very specific to the area. The way the people.
How did you get the dialect right?
Oh, that was just interviewing my former father-in-law and his older brothers whenever they showed up, for 10 years, and then after that, more intentionally, I was trying to get the sense memories from him and stuff. The longer he would talk, the more he would lapse into it. The dialect of his youth. The more he went back in time in his mind, his speech kind of followed. So I
just want to hop in here and say, it's really, what a wonderful and powerful thing to have, readers say, hey, I want to continue this story. I want to know more about these characters, because, in theory, all of our books should leave readers wanting that, right? Readers should get a sense that these characters' lives keep going. We just don't get a window into it. And so what a wonderful thing to have readers come and say, hey, you need to write some more about these people, because I want to know what happens next. And that's a really great thing to have happen as a writer.
So that's the approbation we all need. We don't need to be anointed by somebody in the publishing industry or by another writer. What we need is that feedback from readers, because that's what it's all about, right? If you're not getting positive feedback from readers, that's when it really hurts. And just a trigger warning, I have 1-star reviews for Hardscrabble. Interestingly, it's almost always because of the language. And it's because Papa used the GD word all the time. He named the rooster that GD rooster. That was the name of the rooster on the farm, So there's a lot of bad language in this book. And it's very interesting to me that the people.
But it's organic to the book, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's, he is speaking the way he spoke. So the first person I interviewed to do the Audible version, the audiobook version, said, I'm offended by the language. Can I change all of these GDs and other things to, language I'm more comfortable with? I said, no, you don't get the job. Go away. And, found somebody who wanted to read the book.
Perfect answer. Perfect answer.
To me, it's just ridiculous because it's historic.
Yeah.
How are we going to get to understand the culture and the history that these people lived through if you are going to, impose our, current standard or whatever on it?
Yeah.
And I feel that's just so silly.
delicate
Yeah.
sensibilities. No, this is the way he talked, and so this is the way he
Mhm.
needs to talk on the Audible.
Yeah, and if
But
you don't like those kinds of books, just don't read them.
right, exactly.
You know.
And actually, so it's interesting. So I get these 1-star reviews, and they all complain about the language. Oh, I couldn't get past the second page because of the language and all. And there is no mention at all in these reviews about Papa beating the holy crap out of these children, for over the least little perceived wrong, or just because, Papa was in a bad mood. Nobody complains about all the child abuse that happens. They all complain about the language, and I find that very telling. So you had no problem at all with the violence against these children, but you had a problem with a swear word. What does that say
That's
about
just silly.
you, reader,
Yeah.
dear reader, not about my book?
I do want to take a quick moment because one of the things I saw on your website is that you're involved with the Tiger Flight Foundation.
Yeah, that was that adventure story that I wrote for children. Yeah.
Yeah, talk a little bit about the Tiger Flight Foundation. What is that all about? Because I found it really cool.
Yeah, so that was the book that caused me to fire my agent, because I finally made money as a writer without any help from her. And they're a group of pilots, almost all former military pilots, and a few former commercial pilots, who do leadership talks for kids. And they wanted a book as kind of a leave behind that was geared toward middle grade boys, because it's really hard to get that age group and boys especially to read. And so they wanted an adventure story that kind of subliminally nested in their leadership ideas about becoming what they call pilot in command of your life. So flying your life with the intentionality and the seriousness with which you would fly an airplane. And so they hired me because I was president of the Atlanta Writers Club, and knew about me through the guy who was president-elect of the Writers Club, and he was friends of one of the pilots. And so we collaborated on this book, and it's a book they still sell at their hangar in Rome, Georgia. They still do lots of these leadership talks for Cub Scout groups and Eagle Scouts and Girl Scouts and stuff. And it's just really, a nice little segue, my writing career, into something totally different. I don't think I'll write for kids again, but who knows? Never say never. I said I'd never write a sequel, and here we are talking about
And there you
Return to Heart's
go.
Trouble
That's
Road.
right.
So maybe I will.
You never know where the journey's going to take you.
Yeah, but they're just a great group of folks, and and all they want is to reach kids who were a lot like me when I was growing up, just kind of drifting through life and needing some direction, needing kind of a blueprint. And so that's what they do, and that's what I tried to do in the book, is tell a fun adventure story, but at the same time slip in some leadership ideas.
I love it. George, you have done so much stuff and have written, and I love the story behind why you wrote, your book and the return of it and everything. And I think that is truly inspirational, and I don't know, I find it inspiring. Now, I am the one on this call. I am not a writer. Everybody knows that. I just work with writers. But all of my best friends are writers because they're right here on this call. So I very much can relate to that 100%. But we are coming close on time, and so we do have to end. But George, you are welcome back any time to come and talk with us. You can talk about the Atlanta Writers Guild, anything like that. Your more books that I'm sure you're going to write. You are more than welcome to come. But let's do last minute comments, questions, statements. Russell, I'm going to kick it to you. You didn't speak a whole lot today.
Well, George has such a good story. You don't want to interrupt his stories.
I know.
Because they're flowing. And so sometimes when we have boring guests, I talk a lot, but today George had good flowing, nice stories. It was a good way to start our Halloween and start our week. George, one more time,
Yep.
tell people where to find you, where to find your books.
Sure. So my website, again, is just my first name, last name, GeorgeWeinstein.com. That's WeinsteinEIEI, just like Old MacDonald. So you can find all my books on my website. You can find me on social media on Facebook, Instagram, occasionally on TikTok, dipping my toe in the book talk waters.
I love it.
Very
I love
nice.
it. Fern, what about you?
I just gotta say, this is such a cool origin of a book story. I'm always fascinated by where does the genesis of the idea come from, and I love that you're capturing the history of a people that, you know, if we don't get it down, it's going to be lost. Yeah. So I just applaud you for that, and I look forward to reading your book.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Well, George, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and your Monday and your Halloween to come and hang out with us and talk about your books and your latest book that has come out. We're excited to have you back. We were all super excited about this conversation. So it is wonderful. Thank you so much. You're welcome back anytime. But you guys, we hope everybody has a fantastic Halloween. Be safe out there. But we have a ton of Author Talk shorts coming because the 12 Days of Page Turners Author Talks start this week. So make sure that you tune in for those. But until next time, you guys, we'll catch you all next Monday. Bye for now, everybody.
Happy Halloween.
Hold on, my cat's on my thing. Hold on. Okay. Okay, really. Bye, everybody.